California, of course, has by far the nation's largest population of unsheltered people. These aren't just homeless people, but they're people who literally are sleeping on sidewalks and parks and under freeways and over freeways and wherever they can find. The most notorious of these neighborhoods is Skid Row, where there's about 40,000 unsheltered people living every night. And there's a judge, a federal court judge, who's been hearing a case brought by folks who wanted the homeless accommodated in different ways, in frankly more humane ways, with, say, homes. And this is a pretty irascible judge, and he spent a lot of time trying to figure out what's going on. And one of the things he wrote in this remarkable 110-page opinion was that even when new housing is built for the homeless, it's low-income housing as opposed to housing for the truly destitute. Low-income in San Francisco is a family of four, $120,000 is low-income. So the housing that is being built, that's affordable housing, typically goes to the higher end of the lower income population, and it is disproportionately being given out to white occupants, even though the majority of the homeless population is non-white. And he made a point, too, of saying that as development continues to expand in downtown LA, the form of housing, typically high density, newer units, is completely unaffordable to anyone who is living in those circumstances. So there's tools like inclusionary housing. Well, what's inclusionary housing? Well, that's a notion that if you build 100 units, 20% of them should be reserved for low-income families. And you think, oh, that's interesting. But what that means in practice is that the 80 families who live in the other units subsidize the 20 families who live in the deed or income-restricted units. So there's not a notion, I think, that the folks who don't have housing, such that they need to be one of those 80 renters, are the ones who cause the homeless problem or cause the housing crisis. But it's another classic example of my generation, the boomers, kind of engineering what sounds like a socially responsible situation in a way that leaves higher income homeowners completely off the hook, because why do I need to rent in some, mid-rise in downtown and have to pay extra every month to subsidize units for lower income families? And the answer to that is simply because they had less political power than those who cooked up that system. The first solution we have is to prevent local government, which is responsible for approving new housing in the first instance, from approving only paper housing. And that means approving a plan that says, oh, here's where we're going to allow housing, but then never actually allowing the housing to be built. Because we make housing, even that's compliant with all laws and all standards, and California has a lot of those, we make housing go through a discretionary permit process at the local level where there's two gotchas. One is a planning commission or city council that doesn't want growth and says, yeah, I know, we allowed that in our zoning code or in our general plan, but for the following creative reasons, it's just not right. Your project is just not right. And so they deny or downsize or place infeasible economic conditions to make sure housing doesn't get built. And we fix that in a cumbersome way by creating lawsuit rights and enforcement tools against local government who won't approve the housing they say they're going to allow. So we're not stripping local government of control. We're saying, do your plans, but then you have to allow what you say you're going to allow. And the fact that we even need to do that is kind of crazy, but there you have it. We do have a very processed, stakeholder, litigious culture, and folks are very righteous about protecting that culture. I don't trust the government, so I want to be able to sue them if I don't like what they do. That is a embedded part of a sort of post-60s revolution culture. It's people power in the courts. And when you're trying to stop a nuclear power plant from going next to a school, by all means, give people some power. But when you're trying to stop, there was a couple at the eve of COVID who wanted to build an in-law unit in a single-family neighborhood in Marin County, which is famously opposed to growth, for their actual in-law, who was living in an assisted living facility at high risk of COVID. And a couple of the neighbors objected, and they decided that the house in question was historic. And, in California, anything 50 years old or older is possibly historic. And that takes us to like the Brady Bunch type of home is historic. It's kind of crazy having just been in New Hampshire or New England. What that resulted in was a lawsuit that had absolutely no chance of going in the direction the neighbors wanted it to go. But it took 1.5 years of lawyers and court time and city time to decide the case was without any merit at all. And of course, during that time, the poor mother lived in an assisted living facility. They couldn't talk to her. They couldn't see her. She was at risk of COVID. And then the economics, of course, also changed because construction costs have zoomed up. And what should have been a pretty modest home modification to create a unit of living space so that both families had privacy instead turned into a nightmare. And that kind of example is rampant. We have housing projects that have been sued 20 and 30 times for each subsequent approval, for each sub-area, for each, next phase. And the most common of these lawsuits is brought under the California Environmental Quality Act, which was, all about protecting the environment. But when you define the environment as the view from your sidewalk, and you protect the environment as ambient noise 24/7 and don't allow for construction, hammering a nail, to be anything other than a new significant adverse impact to the environment. When you take it down to a micro level, you've basically frozen our communities in amber. And those communities and residents that are wealthy enough to use CEQA as a litigation tool, and it's pretty inexpensive to do so, have done so with vigor. Forcing cities to approve housing that they say they allow, we've made great progress. In curtailing CEQA abuse, we've not made great progress, but boy, we've really peeled back the curtain, and no one can anymore pretend that in these contexts it's anything other than a NIMBY tool, no in my backyard, but also a very, very powerful tool used by the building trades, which is a group of unionized construction workers, which I think at last count represented a good bit less than 10% of the construction workers in the state. And they typically use CEQA lawsuits or lawsuit threats to get union contracts to build the housing, but they can't build this small ADU stuff either, but they sure like the tool to be kept in place. So they've been sort of the single most important obstacle to CEQA reform in the arena of housing.